All right, so we're going to be working on lesson 56 today. We want to start by making sure that we have read page 359 to 361 before we do the lesson practice. You also want to make sure that you follow along on a piece of paper, and you can pause the video if I go too fast, and you can also rewind. So problem A on lesson practice, which is on page 361 in your math book, says compare these fractions. Draw and shade a pair of congruent figures to illustrate each comparison. Now congruent means equal. So I need to draw a picture for 1/2 and for 2/3 that will show me which one is bigger. And then I'm going to put a greater than, less than, or equal sign in here. All right. So I'm going to start with drawing 1/2. I'm going to do a box that's the same size on each side, or about the same size. Okay, and I'm going to take this box over here, I'm going to divide it into halves. We got 1/2 and 2/2. And then I'm going to take this box and I'm going to divide it into, divide it into thirds. And we're going to pretend those are all equal. All right. And just in case you're not sure, I'm going to mark where the half button is, or the half mark is, on this one. Okay, so you can see that for when we get back to that in a moment. Okay, it says draw and shade. So I drew them. This is a 1/2, and one of these is 1/2, and these are divided into thirds. And we're going to be shading 2/3. Okay, so let's switch our colors so we can see our shading more easily. Okay, so this in here we're going to shade 1/2. So there's 1/2 shaded. And in this one here we're going to shade 2/3. So we're going to shade 2 of these thirds boxes. So here's 1/3, and here's 1/3, and all together that's 2/3. Okay. And we can see, because of that mark I made at the beginning, the pink little dash line, that that's a half. 2/3 is obviously bigger than 1/2 if the boxes are the same size. So we would put a less than symbol in here because 1/2 is less than 2/3. Okay, moving on to B, we're going to do the same thing again. We're going to draw a fraction picture for each of these, and then we're going to compare them. So this last time I did rectangles, this time we're going to make some circles. So there's a circle we're going to use for halves, and there's a circle we're going to use for quarters. So we're going to divide this one into half. And the cool thing about quarters is that we can draw half and then split each of those halves in a half, and that'll give us quarters. All right. So we're going to compare 1/2 to 1/4. So let's go with orange. We'll shade 1/2 of this picture. This is draw and shade right here. And then I'm going to do the same thing with this one. I'm going to shade 1/4. Well, we can see by looking at these two pictures that 1/4 is half of a half. I would have needed to have shaded this section here to make it a half, and so it's less. So 1/2 is bigger than 1/4, so we're going to write greater than. 1/2 is more than 1/4. Okay, moving on to number C. This says arrange the numbers in problems C and D in order from greatest to least. So the biggest one's going to come first and the smallest one's going to come last. And just like when we are working with alphabetizing, we're going to look at our first numbers here. So all of these start with a 0. So if we're just looking at the ones place, they're all equal. And so we need to move to the next one. So the 10th place, we've got a 5, we've got a 2, and we've got a 2. Now, these two here both have a 2, so those are still equal. But this one here, the 5/10, is obviously bigger than 2/10, right? So it says from greatest to least. So this one, this 5/10 is the biggest one. So we're going to put that one first. So 0.5 would be listed first. Then we're going to go to the next spot. Now, this number here doesn't have another number, so it's a 0. There's an invisible 0 there. And this one here has a 5. Well, 5 is bigger than 0, so this one, 25 hundredths, is going to be the next largest because 5 hundredths is bigger than 0 hundredths. So our next smallest one is 25 hundredths. And then last would be this one here. It is 2/10. Or we could say 20 hundredths, but that 0 is invisible, so we're going to say 2/10. So here's our answer. Okay, we have one more of those. We'll walk you through this one more time. Okay, we're going to start with the first number in the ones place. Oops, something happened there. Oops, lost my numbers. Okay, so the first numbers are all zeros. So in the ones place, they're all equal. Okay, we're going to go to the tens place. We've got a 7. We've got a 7, a 9, and a 7. 9/10, this one here, is the biggest. These two, 75 hundredths and 7/10, are smaller than 9/10. So this one here is the biggest. So we're going to write 0.9. That's 9/10. Next, we're going to go to the hundredths place. Well, this one here has an invisible 0 there, so 0 for the hundredths place. And 5 for the hundredths place on 75 hundredths. So 75 hundredths is bigger because 5 is bigger than 0. So we're going to write 0.75. That's the next biggest one. So that's 75 hundredths is bigger than 7/10. That's the last number. So this was the second biggest one, and then we finished off with the 7/10. We don't need to put the 0 there because it wasn't in our problem. I just added it so that you could see the difference. So we've got 9/10 is the biggest, 75 hundredths is the second biggest, and 7/10 is the smallest. So we've got from greatest to least listed. And that's all for lesson 56.